Welcome to Strategy Next, the podcast where bold ideas and visionary strategies shape the future of business. Brought to you by J. Helmy and Company, we unlock insights from trailblazing leaders and innovators, redefining what's possible. From scaling startups to transforming global enterprises, Strategy Next is your guide to staying ahead, innovating boldly, and leading with purpose. The future doesn't wait. Let's discover what's next together.
Hello again, I'm Jon, and welcome to Strategy Next from J. Helmy and Company. Today, a very special guest joining us. She's a graduate of the MIT Sloan School of Management, a Boston Business Journal 40 Under 40 Award winner, and the founder and CEO of Wabbi, a company that helps businesses streamline security in their development processes. It's an honor to have with us today, Brittany Greenfield. Brittany, welcome to Strategy Next.
Thanks so much for having me today, Jon.
It's a pleasure. Why don't we start out with something I think is near and dear to a lot of our listeners' hearts when it comes to the topic of data security. That is the CrowdStrike incident back in July. I think perhaps what was most scary to a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of consumers, quite frankly, was how interdependent we all are, how all of our digital lives are so tied to a few key vendors.
Yeah, for sure. I think we were, as horrible as it was for the first 72 hours, and obviously the effects persisted beyond that, we were lucky that it wasn't an adversary that did it, that it was our own best of intentions that took it down. And it was a real moment of awakening, to your point, that we deal in this very fragile digital supply chain, and quality assurance is critical. It's interesting that the notion of cybersecurity and breaches is always sort of this bad actor. And here it was our own bad actor, so to speak. And it was a breach. It was still a breach, right? And it was a breach on so many levels. It was a breach on reliability. It was a breach on trust, so just because it wasn't a bad guy coming for it doesn't mean it wasn't a breach. And I will give the CrowdStrike CEO a lot of credit. He's been out and said, yeah, we didn't do our job. We took piece A and piece B and didn't do a standard QA process. And I think that's the big thing that companies need to take away, is that your products, and that product could be software, it could be a piece of clothing you sell to somebody, are only as good as your processes in delivering them to the customer to deliver on the customer promise. So don't take for granted all the components, because the other thing about software especially, and security, they're both living, breathing things. So they're changing on a daily basis. And that is where it becomes very, very fragile. And we saw that very quickly.
Absolutely. What do you say to entrepreneurs and leaders of companies who have so much trying to take their attention every day in terms of growing their business? They know that data security is critical, but it's just one of 15 hot fires on their plate. How should someone make time? How should they prioritize information security?
It doesn't matter what size you are. Good data security is like brushing your teeth every morning, right? You got to have good hygiene in place. It doesn't have to be complex, right? It means very simple things like MFA, or hey, did somebody check that this software is working the way it's supposed to? It's those little things that if you don't have those, especially for early stage companies, if you don't have the good foundations in place from day one, it will spiral out of control very, very quickly. And, I think we're in an era across all companies where we're finally stopping the growth at all costs. And growth at all costs, especially in VC-backed firms, got to mean a lot about funding. But it also meant that they were growing rapidly without good processes, without good foundations. And that's how things start to break pretty quickly. And I think that's some of what we saw with the CrowdStrike breach as well.
Absolutely. Oh, I've read that you identify yourself as a total nerd in identifying market opportunities and building teams and strategies to capture them. And obviously, I think you've done that very successfully at Wabbi. Tell us a little bit about the business and how it originated and how you've grown it.
Yeah, so I've been in enterprise software my whole career. I'm a technologist, but I know better than to write code. Just because I can finger paint doesn't mean I'm a painter. And I got into cybersecurity when I was working in IoT and networking with Cisco, because you can't talk about the foundations of our digital economy and not talk about cyber. Because the cool thing about cyber is two things. One, we'll never realize the full potential of any technology that we have if we can't secure it appropriately. I think that's coming very top of mind for people as we think about applications of AI. And then the second piece is cyber always has to be one step ahead of whatever technology is out there. So the industry is constantly changing, and you've got to, it's a place of great intellectual curiosity. So I started in the endpoint space. And if you think about, for those that aren't familiar with the alphabet soup of cyber, endpoint is like antivirus on your computer, gets obviously more sophisticated than that. And I got very, very frustrated that as I talked to prospects and analysts and customers, everybody was very focused on perimeter security and not the foundations, right? There's a reason I preach the good word about foundations. And I like to say that's akin to building a house, where you build the house, toss everybody in, and then say, don't worry, it's safe because I put some kind of ring or ADT system on it. But nobody ever checked to make sure the wiring was safe and there wasn't a crack in the foundation, and that, the windows all shut, or more importantly, even that the right kind of lock is on the front door. You wouldn't want a bathroom lock on your front door because somebody can pop that with a pin. Flip side is you probably also don't need a industrial deadbolt. Maybe some people do, but right. And it's all about that balance. And so that's where Wabbi was born of. I think most people are familiar with the term DevSecOps nowadays, where as companies were finishing their DevOps transformation, security was being left behind, which meant things were unsecure because they couldn't keep pace. And it's not enough to have a good idea. You have to have a good idea at the right time. Organizations were finishing their DevOps transformations and realizing that because they hadn't brought security on the journey, it was creating different kinds of bottlenecks, different kinds of risks, not necessarily just breach risk. It could be project delivery risk. We talk to customers, they say, 9 out of 10 times, which is, by the way, still, unfortunately, the industry stat, they pass the code without true security approval. And they say they do it because they just don't have visibility. Well, what happens that 10th time? Oh, you have to go fix it. Well, it's not just fix it, rebuild it sometimes. So, I think one of the things I happen to love about the DevSecOps space is that we get into tying cyber, not just to this scary place where an adversary is coming for my data, but to overall business risk. And it's one of the levers that we control for business risk.
So for clients who come to Wabbi, are they seeking advice or are they afraid?
Other places of cybersecurity is driven by fear. And for those listening, that heavy FUD sales. Hey, for us, it's actually more about productivity and efficiency. We're truly bridging the gap between security and development. You'll see some platforms on the market that really speak to one party or the other. I like to say we translate security into development and development into security. They both have their own languages, their own processes, and we do not disrupt them, but rather we allow them to coexist. And so on the security front, look, we're talking about a 3 million person shortage in cybersecurity, and that's not going away anytime soon. And while there's been this focus on giving developers more autonomy, they're still not cybersecurity professionals. So on the security teams become infinitely scalable. And that's one of the reasons they come to us. And so you're starting, one of the things that you're really hearing this year is burnout on cyber teams. Well, if we can automate all the manual stuff, which very often ends up with call Joe, right? And we can allow them not only to decrease that burnout, increase their productivity. One of our clients told us they flipped their work from being 75% manual to 25% manual. But more importantly, that 25% manual is now strategic. They get to partner with the development teams and help them problem solve. They get to write better policies. They get to stay on top of current trends. So there's a real quality of life change there. And then on the development side, the reason they like us is nobody's burying their head in the sand anymore about, I don't need to do security. It reduces noise in their life, in their software development life cycle, because they're only getting the information spoon-fed to them. This is what you need to do specifically for this feature or for this vulnerability. So it makes it very simple. They don't have to become SMEs. So as a result, they get overall productivity and efficiency gains. And I like to say just confidence, right? They're doing the right thing. It's not just, hey, I'm trying to do the right thing. And one of our customers is a software developer. And he said, as a result, our developers are security conscious. But before Wabbi, he'd get 10 emails a day saying, hey, is this the right test to do right now? And right, so you start to see where all these friction points and bottlenecks come in. So it's great. It's nice that it's about improving their quality of life and not just saying, oh my God, if you don't do this, the bad thing's going to happen, because the bad thing's going to happen no matter what. The question is, what happens after the bad thing happens?
Absolutely. So in terms of working smarter rather than harder, what role does AI play here?
I think, again, it gets to productivity and efficiency. I don't think we know yet, because for all the good, it also introduces bad. Immediately, you saw exponential increases in the number of vulnerabilities being exploited as soon as AI became very popular. I say it's a little akin to open source. Use, but trust but verify. I think now you're also getting some burnout on using AI. And so where we can help people is in innovation, right? What AI helps us, and this is a broader technology statement, is it takes away the manual work, the medial work that humans aren't good at. Humans like to problem solve. We've seen this already with robotics. It did not take away human jobs. It allowed humans to be more strategic and then bring productivity to the robots because they could spot trends. So I think that's where we're going to see that first set of gains. We use AI internally for a lot of marketing. It's like having your own copy editor. I'm not above saying, oh my God, I need 3 talking points. Let me brainstorm with the chat bot. Flip side is, I'm going to take it with a grain of salt. And sometimes the chatbot can be a little dumb. And I was like, very, very verbose. I just need 3 bullets. So, but, I think it really, like all technology, and that should be our goal with technology, is it should allow us to do what humans do best, which is problem solve, ideate, innovate. And that's why I don't think it's going to be as scary as it is, but we do have to secure it first before we can really start using it.
Absolutely. What would you say to the solo entrepreneur or a startup? They know they need cybersecurity assistance, but they just don't know where to start.
I go back to my earlier statement. Do not ever think you're too small for this. In fact, the majority of attacks are to the SMBs because they know that they are less likely to be defended somehow and have less sophistication. But you do not have to boil the ocean. Start with some simple policies internally. And there are a lot of free tools and resources as well. So go out, happy to connect with anybody if you want to reach out on LinkedIn and have a conversation. But that's the nice thing about cyber being top of mind for everybody. That means there's a lot of freemiums. But start just with policies and good common sense. And I think that's the other thing we often forget in technology and in cyber. Common sense is where you always start. We got, literally on Friday, one of our engineers that just joined us got a text saying it was from me. And he's been through this rodeo, right? And he said, hey, Brittany, hey, by the way, phone number is visible on our HRIS as well as on my, email account, everything. He said, I just want to make sure this number isn't, And I said, correct, right? And what they're counting on is that adrenaline rush. That, oh my God, my new boss just texted me and asked me for something important. I've got to do it, right? Gift cards. So take a beat. Never call the number that they give you. Always go directly to your banking website, whatever. And I think that's the number one thing we actually forget with cybersecurity.
Absolutely.
And do not use the default password with your Wi-Fi.
That's right. And like you said, with the CrowdStrike issue, it really, 2020 hindsight, it came down to QA or a lack of QA.
Correct.
And if you look at some events, you don't find always a state with genius, evil programmers. You find somebody forgot to lock the door.
Correct.
Somebody forgot to test the software. So it sounds like focusing on the basics is perhaps very important.
Exactly. Basics. If you get the basics, the rest will come. I don't want to say necessarily easily because it can get very complicated very quickly, but it won't be as hard. And then it becomes built into your culture, right? People will take that extra moment to verify that whether or not somebody actually sent that text. And that's why you've got to start from day one, having a security mindset.
Absolutely. It's an investment, really. And
yes.
It's an investment you cannot afford not to make.
Correct. And I think the other thing, and again, there are often very free resources around this, is that it's not if, it's when you get breached. And you also need to have a plan for the after. There are mitigating protocols you can put in so that if you get breached, right, data recovery, something like that, being able to restore a laptop. But also, how are you going to actually respond? Do you have to contact customers? Again, they're relying on an adrenaline rush for you to not have clarity in it. A tabletop exercise, I actually just did one with a broader InfoSec group 2 weeks ago, because it's good to stay fresh. How are you going to think about it? What do we need to do? What do we need to lock down? How do we get a computer back from an employee? Those little things will keep it's the same reason people in earthquake zones keep a bag, right? They have a plan for where you're going to meet your family and everything. It'll keep your blood pressure down, and then it'll make the response easier.
When it comes to ransomware, is it a financial decision or an ethical decision or both?
I think it's often a financial decision. We actually saw this with the United Healthcare breach earlier this year. They were very public about saying we paid the ransom because the cost, not just to us, but to so many people around the United States, of not paying the ransom was so much greater. So, there is an ethical decision, but we've got to remember these guys that are deploying ransomware, a lot of them are low-hanging fruit crooks, but they're enterprises. Cybersecurity, if it was its own country, we can have a debate about that too, would be the world's third largest GDP on its own, cybercrime. And so remember, these guys have a manager. They have a quota. It's just a little different than yours and mine. And so you can have the ethical debate, but how long are you going to do that? And I was working with not a client, but a friend that's in the law world. And he was telling me about, they had 2 months earlier done a table exercise. Everybody's going, absolutely not, never pay the ransom, whatnot. Want to know what happens? They get ransomware, pay them immediately. But it was a negotiation, actually. He said it was shocking. They came back and they said, okay, let me ask my manager if I can discount that product for you. And, they obviously had experts in there working with, but yeah, it's a bigger ethical concern. You've got to do what's right for your business, for your customers, for your employees. And that's also an ethical decision, right? To say we're not, again, I go to United Healthcare. They said, we're not taking our systems down. That will impact too many people for too long if we don't do it.
So, Brittany, let me ask you from your personal perspective. You built your business in your 30s. Was being young in the technology world your biggest challenge, or was being female your biggest challenge?
Yeah, so I'd say being a female in technology. In the scheme of things, I'm not. You actually see founding stats of, while I am under 40, I'm on the older side of under 40. And I had real experience running P&Ls, running teams, building businesses, doing this before. And you actually see the success rate changes dramatically once somebody is over 30. It's because we've seen it a little bit. Flip side, I'm old enough that I have a mortgage, right? You have your different risk profile, different things you're considering, different things you have to give up. But being a female, I actually thought, especially being in a very technical environment, you either know your stuff or you don't, it wouldn't be a problem. But the reality is while women only get just over 2% of VC funding, it's even worse in enterprise software and then in cybersecurity, where you can take the funding of any half year across all VC-backed cyber firms. And it is more than for women in cyber in the last 10 years combined.
Wow.
And so that is a real issue. I get asked the question all the time, why? And if I knew the answer, I'd certainly be trying to fix it. And it's a real problem. The reality is we're solving tough problems. And it's tough when your competitors have 24 million in the bank. Now, do we have the better product? Do we have the better business? For sure, because we didn't have growth at all costs. But it means that fundamentally they're still getting more shots. And so that does actually pose a real challenge. I think this is also why you see second-time founders across all industries. You learn how much you should have in the bank first before you even start developing the product. Because, I founded the company. We'd done our alphas and our betas, and we were going to have our debutante moment in spring of 2020, right? Didn't quite plan for that, right? You couldn't do all the risk management planning, and then we were going to do a fundraise, and there was an implosion in the banking industry, right? So really, you never know what's going to happen. I think this is one of the things, but it's tough. I mean, you see half of women more broadly drop out of the tech workforce by age 35, and which is tough, right? Because that's also a real tech jobs on average pay more than, and it's not just engineers, it's across all roles in technology companies. Tech jobs pay significantly more, right? So we talk about the gender wage gap, and then you have women dropping out of high paying roles. You also have women actually graduating at parity in technical degrees and not pursuing that. So it's death by 1,000 cuts, and we've got a lot of fundamental things. There was actually a good article in the Journal last week saying, while we have started to make some very small progress about female tech CEOs, you're not getting the support in the early entry and then the middle management. So there's definitely a broken rung there.
A lot more work needs to be done, that's for sure.
Yes.
Well, this has been a fascinating discussion. I so appreciate it, Brittany. Before we leave you, any other thoughts that you want to share with our audience about their fears or their hopes or their questions about it?
Look, fears and hopes. I told a GM from a large tech company that I was talking to last week, I was going to steal this from him. And he said, think every day about what's going to make you excited about the future and what you need to be paranoid about. And that is how, whether you're an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur or whatever you're doing in your life, I think that's how you can keep yourself level set, keep that intellectual curiosity about it, but not anything. As you see, I'm pretty even keeled on AI. Everybody was like, oh my God, it's the world's best thing. You're like, it's just another technical innovation. It's a very big one, but I think it will help you in stride respond better. But that's always be looking hopeful to the future, but always be thinking about what's next. And that could be good or bad. And then for anybody that I'm a big believer in LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I would be happy to have any more of these conversations. So it's the fun part about my job and getting to do these kinds of podcasts where I get to meet a lot of interesting people and hear what their thoughts are.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Brittany. We've been talking today with the founder and CEO of Wabbi, Brittany Greenfield. Thank you so much. And this has been Jon Lobb for Strategy Next from J. Helmy & Company.
Thank you for joining us on Strategy Next, where today's insights ignite tomorrow's possibilities. Subscribe now to never miss a conversation and share this journey with your network. Have ideas or feedback? Reach us anytime at strategynext@jhelmy.co. Join us next time as we explore new horizons in strategy and innovation. Until then, lead boldly and think beyond limits.